if I'm quite doing this justice, but I'm trying. So one place that I want to go to, we didn't look at it last week, so one place that I want to go to as we kind of finish thinking about this part and then move on, is one of the questions that I raised last week, there's a wall there, is to what degree is the image of God corrupted, hidden, lost, whatever word you want to use, as a result of sin? So remember, we kind of talked about I sort of picked on them, but the Presbyterians who basically think that the image of God is totally corrupted or totally lost as a result of sin. One passage that I'll just take you to on that, and then we can do with it whatever, is Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. And in Genesis 9:6, God is talking to Noah and his sons, and he says, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image." So the idea there is that God gets justice for the murder of a human because all humans are made in the image of God, which leads me to believe, well, the image of God is not totally lost, it's not totally corrupted, it doesn't disappear or whatever as a result of sin. Because if that were the case, then God wouldn't feel the need to get justice for those who've been murdered, right? So there is this sense, and again, I used this last week, I think there's a sense in which you have that passage, but you also have Jesus way later in the New Testament saying, "Whatever you've done unto the least of these, you've done unto me also." Well, again, if man is not still in the image, whether or not Jesus doesn't say, "Whatever you've done unto the least of these who claim me," he just says, "Whatever you've done." Uh-oh. Is that yours? So I just want to throw that out there, and then I also want to throw out to you Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, there we go. Colossians 1, verse 15. Now this is Paul, and this is like a wonderful section in the New Testament, and probably one of the best sections of Paul's writing ever, because he's talking about the power and the glory and the majesty and the eternal nature of Jesus. And he starts that section off in Colossians 1:15 with, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation." And so we have that word image again. Now by the time we get to the New Testament, that word for image, I'm just going to stick it down here, don't get confused, but that word for image is some version of the word icon. Icon will be used most of the time to mean image and likeness. Now there are cases, as we talked about last week, where homoisis is used there, but most often it's going to be icon. So where the Hebrew kind of sees the distinction between the character of people versus the relationship, the New Testament sort of flattens all of that and says, well, you have the character of God because you have a relationship with God, or you have a relationship with God because you share in the character of God. Now that is not to say, and I think this is where the Presbyterian sort of mindset on this shows up, that is not to say that you're perfect just because you have the character of God. I think one of the things that separates people from animals is, we have the ability to feel. We're emotional. We have the ability to think beyond survival. So we're rational in that way. That's not something that shows up so much. You do see a few examples of it in the animal kingdom, but by and large, people are doing higher order thinking. And that's one of the things that kind of puts us in a different perspective, a different relationship to God. So I just wanted to throw those two out there. Another one, if you just want it, it's Romans 8:29. That's that passage that is, I once preached at a Presbyterian church, and I told them that as Presbyterians, they all had this written on their heart, which is, "For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he," meaning Jesus, "might be the firstborn among many brethren." There again, for those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image. There's that word again, akon. So that's sort of the way that the New Testament develops on that. Now, I don't want to spend a whole ton of time on this little section, but there is a distinction to be made, and hopefully I can do this without it being confusing, but it confuses me, so we'll see. But there's a distinction to be made between the Catholic notion of what's going on here and, broadly speaking, the Protestant notion. Protestants being anybody who's not Catholic. For Catholics, there is a distinct column, which is the image of God, and there's a distinct column, which is the likeness of God. For Protestants, there is one column that is the image and likeness. It's the same thing. I went too far. Hold on. I was like, wait, that's not what I wanted to say. The way that the Catholics get here, and there's a reason why I'm doing this, it's not just to overload you with information, but the way that Catholics get here is that in Genesis it says man was created in God's image and created according to his likeness. So for them there's a distinction to be made there, that you were created as this, in his image, as his image, but according to his likeness, which means your likeness may not be exactly the same. Right? It shares similarities, it shares things, but it may not be exactly the same. I think that's I really don't have a problem with that logic, because if you think about children, they're biologically your children. There's nothing you can do about it. Depending on the situation and the circumstances, you may or may not know it, they may or may not know it, but particularly for men, that is a consideration. But the likeness can change. Like, again, I used Lizzie last week, and you can use Lizzie again. She started off life, she was born, everybody thought she looked just like Corey. Not anymore. Now she looks like Nate and Christian. So the likeness is sort of according to the likeness of them, as opposed to she looks just like them, because we're not clones of our parents. So that's kind of the logic that the Catholics will use on that the image of God, which is more or less your soul, your spirit, whatever like that, that's one thing. Your characteristics, your traits, those things that would make you look similar to God, there's a little bit of wiggle room on what that looks like. Because of that, Catholics will say that the only thing that suffered as a result of the fall, as a result of sin, is righteousness, which is linked to your likeness. So here, this is the easiest place to see the distinction, is that because of sin, and the Bible holds up to this, by the way. I have said it before, I will say it again. We should not throw out everything that the Catholics believe just because it comes from a Catholic. If it weren't for the Catholics, we wouldn't be here. Now, I'm not saying we should all be Catholic. I'm just saying if it weren't for the Catholics, we wouldn't be here. And so the image remains. For the Catholics, just because sin is in the world, just because man commits sin, that doesn't make you any less made in the image of God. But it does remove your righteousness. And so you get Paul, who says, there is none righteous, no, not one. This idea that what is it that Christ is restoring in us? Is he restoring God's image? Is he restoring God's likeness? Or to put that in different terms, is he giving us his righteousness? Well, yes. What does Paul say? We are clothed with his righteousness. So it's not about this being the same thing. It's this, you could almost come over here and put under likeness righteousness, because at the end of the day, that's what that is for the Catholics. Righteousness, which, by the way, for them is linked to grace. So then we come to, in Catholic thought, you must go to Mass. You must participate in the Mass. You must baptize your child. You must be confirmed in the church. All of those things basically add to your stockpile of grace so that over time you are being renewed and restored in righteousness until when Christ returns, you are restored to his likeness. Now for them, that's a lifelong process. Nobody ever gets there, okay?
I sometimes think it might talk about Catholic. You say, well, we want to be here with the Catholic. You talk about the origin of Mary.
No, what I mean by that is in the history of the early church, there was the early church with the apostles, right? There were no denominational distinctions. We got 5, Jason. I forgot to do my sticky. So there were no denominational distinctions. There weren't even really doctrinal disagreements so much, because at that point, it was the 12 apostles who were leading the church. Over time, that, of course, the apostles died, and that kind of gets dispersed out. The church grows. And so there's a development in, okay, how are we going to govern the church because it's big? I mean, you got to think about this. Day of Pentecost, you get 3,000 people added to the church. Later on, Peter is preaching, and you get 5,000 more. So the early church in the time of the disciples in and around Jerusalem is 8,000 people. There's not a church in this area that's got 8,000 people. So you've got to figure out, okay, how are we going to manage that? Well, the church doesn't slow down. It keeps growing, and what happens is maybe 300 to 400 years, my dating on all of this is fuzzy. Well, let's just fast forward to when Constantine is emperor of the Roman Empire, okay? The Roman Catholic Church, and by the way, that word Catholic means universal, okay? So the Roman Catholic Church, meaning the universal church from Rome, is what exists. But what happens when Constantine and slightly after is there's a split in the universal church so that you have the Western Church and the Eastern Church. Now, we still have the Eastern Church. That's the Eastern Orthodox. And we still have the Western Church. It doesn't look like it did. That's the Roman Catholic Church. Well, in 1517, when you have the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther, now all at once you get Lutheranism, you get Presbyterianism. In 1562, you get Anglicanism. Following Anglicanism, you get out of the Presbyterians and the Anglicans, you get the Baptists. So, yeah, I mean, it's this really weird thing. And those are just kind of the big ones. But it's this really weird thing where if Luther had not had the Catholic Church to break with, if he hadn't had disagreements with the Catholic Church, there would be no Protestant. We'd all be Catholic. Because for the longest time, Catholicism, if you were a Christian, that's what you were. That is why, sorry, that was a fun rabbit. 1564 on the Anglican Church, not 62. Anyway, that's like the Reformation's my favorite little period of church history. But I mean, and you have disagreements happening within the Catholic Church before Luther, but Luther's the guy that sort of sets the flame under the whole thing and blows it up. By the way, just free because I'm on this, Luther never intended to actually break with the Catholic Church. What Luther saw was things that needed to be reformed. And so he wanted to change and update, if you will, the Catholic Church. But he didn't actually want to break from it. So if we had actually done what Luther started out intending, we'd all still be Catholic.
Yeah. There are not very many Lutheran and Presbyterian churches around.
Presbyterians are pretty popular.
There's one up on Church Street.
Yeah, there's Columbia Presbyterian in Hattiesburg. You've got First Pres on the highway. You've got Woodland Presbyterian. You've got Westminster Presbyterian. They tend to be bigger churches. There's not as many like little tiny Presbyterian churches. There's a lot, they tend to be bigger. And Lutherans, there's 2 Lutheran churches in Hattiesburg. So, I mean, they're around. All these groups are around. So anyway, okay, that was free. Do with that what you want. But my other reason for saying that if it weren't for Catholics, we wouldn't exist is also we got to have somebody to disagree with. and the public enemy number one, and I don't mean that in as negative a way as it sounds, for most Protestants, Baptist, Pentecostal, whatever, are the Catholics. That's just the way that goes. I mean, y'all remember, we had Sam. Sam was the Lone Ranger. he was the only Catholic, other than Coach Fales, that I guess there weren't any more while we were there, were there? Yeah. So, I mean, you know, at this day and age around here, there are fewer of these and more of these. John Bonet was raised Catholic. So, I mean, they're around, but anyway, sorry. I'll move on now. For the Protestants, though, this means the same thing. The image of God and the likeness of God are the same thing. So to be made in his image, to be made according to his righteousness, the image is the same as the likeness. So the question then becomes, for Catholics versus Protestants on this issue is, am I still in? As a human, am I still in? And for the Catholics, well, yes, you're still in, because the image wasn't corrupted, just your righteousness is gone. And the only way you get righteousness back is to participate in the grace of Jesus. For the Protestants, no, you have no righteousness, you have no image, it's totally corrupt, it's totally gone. You can't do anything. The only way that you get salvation is by Jesus and the Holy Spirit working in you first. Full stop, end of story. The image of God has to be restored. The word they will use is regeneration. You have to be regenerated so that the righteousness can be added back to you, right? But the righteousness of Jesus comes to you at the point of salvation, end of story. As opposed to you get a little grace here and a little grace there and a little grace there, and over time you can add to your grace and, you know, whatever, which is the Catholic. This is why many people, and I don't totally agree with this distinction, but many people will say Catholics believe in works-based salvation because you have to go to Mass, you have to do confirmation, you have to, all that. Protestants believe in faith. That is the way people will talk about that. Yeah. Now, knowing Catholics, knowing Catholic doctrine, I don't necessarily agree with that. Yeah, confession is a sacrament. Confession is a sacrament. And, well, anyway, maybe the next thing we'll do is, what do Catholics believe? No. I love to talk about it, so it doesn't bother me. But there is the reason why I think that the Protestants, especially the early Protestants, sort of missed the mark on this is because they actually try to have their cake and eat it too at the end of the day. They will say the image and the likeness are the same thing. You lost your righteousness, so you lose your image. Okay, fine. But then they turn around and they say, yeah, but there's like this general image of God and there's this special image of God, and the special image of God is in each individual person. So you're a sinner, so you've lost the special image, but humanity's still in the general image. Well, isn't that the same thing as that? I mean, because all we're saying is there's a distinction between being made in the image and righteousness. Luther will say that man almost lost the image. So he won't even go so far as to say it's totally gone. This is the guy who broke with the Catholics over some of this. John Calvin, the great Presbyterian founder, sort of, says that a relic of the image of God remains in the fallen condition. So basically what they're both arguing is sin is so bad that it gets you down to the bare bones of the image of God. Now, I'll agree with that. I'll take that and be totally fine with it. But I will not be totally fine with you saying that sin destroyed the image of God. I can't be okay with that. Now, the other point of this that I want to make, and we will move from this, is how do we exist in relationship with God? I mean, it's not like he's a heavenly overlord, right? He's not just like moving the chess pieces around just to see what we'll do next. He's not playing The Sims. Like, this is...
He's not playing any kind of word games with us.
Yeah, he's not trying to trick us. He's not anything like that. But what God consistently invites his people to over and over again are two things. One is prayer. And the other thing is he has been consistently working toward dwelling with his people, coming down and dwelling with them. So in the Old Testament, he lives in the tabernacle. Once we get the establishment of the nation, he dwells in the temple. When the temple is destroyed, he comes back and he dwells in the person Jesus. Once Jesus has ascended back into heaven, he exists as the Holy Spirit who lives inside of us. And at the end of the age, the new heavens and the new earth will come down to the restored heaven so that he can dwell with his people. So we don't have a distant relationship with God. It works much the other way. It's very personal. Here again, one place I disagree with the Catholics. I don't need a priest to pray for me because he doesn't have any more access to God than I do. So we have this I-you relationship to God, like we do with each other. I do this, you do that. I talk to you, you talk to me, right? So we have these personal relationships that also distinguish us from the animal kingdom in a lot of ways. Now, I know I haven't said anything about angels in a while. I'm getting back there. So, here you go. Take your pick. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? What does it mean to be human? Well, is it the relationship that we have with God? Is it the attributes that we have with God? Do we share? Do we look like God? Like, what does that mean? Everybody's got an answer. And for my part, it's somewhere kind of in the middle of all that. All right? There used to be, this is not popular anymore, and it shouldn't be, but there used to be this popular notion that God existed in heaven and he looked like a man. So you had the man in the sky. And when it said that we were, yeah. So when you had this idea that we were created in the image of God according to his likeness, what that meant was, well, God took on the form of a person, and then he made people who look like people. No. Sorry. I mean, can he appear that way? Yeah, he did. He's called Jesus. But does he exist that way? I'm going to say no. I don't. The Bible really doesn't hold up to the big man in the sky. But, that's a...
I hear that a lot about God, the man upstairs.
Yeah, the big man upstairs. Yeah.
I can't, like, he's an awesome God. Well, you can't put him in the category of man. But you hear him praise the Lord.
Here's another little mini-series that I will not go on, but what should that relationship look like? Because he's an awesome God, and you don't want to bring God down to our earthly categories, right? But at the same time, he's not some king who sits on a throne way over there and you can't walk into the throne room, because that's what prayer is. So there's this interesting kind of thing. We were talking about it Wednesday night. I went to Carrie with a girl, and yes, I'm live streamed, I don't care. I went to Carrie with a girl, and she would start her prayers with, "Dear Daddy," and would pray. That's wrong. Well, she took it very literally whenever Paul says our soul will cry out, "Abba, Father," because Abba in the language translates into some sort of familiar fatherly term. But yeah, it's very odd. Oh, you could feel it. Like, we'd be at BSU stuff, and she'd start to pray, and we'd all just be like, okay. Now, does that mean that her prayer was insincere, that God didn't hear it? No. But is it a bit too familiar? Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that's free again. Do what you want with that. So let's see, where do I want to go now? The next spot that we got to go, Josh, I'm really not trying to put you off with your Nephilim, I promise. But the next spot that we got to go, because, okay, this is part of the equation, but the rest of the equation is people have souls. Now, what we said about angels, just so I can say something about angels, is that angels are spirits, right? They are spirits who can look like people. They are spirits who have sort of that scary embodiment like you see in Revelation and Ezekiel and other places where they're wheels with eyes and all these pairs of wings and all this weird, crazy stuff. But we never...
You can see them, I don't think you can see them, they're invisible.
Well, I mean, so that's... Either they're invisible and we can't see them, or there is a really good veil between the physical world and the spiritual world.
I had one time, when it's in my life, I was writing blogs, I had 3,014 going down deep grade, and it didn't have a dog in it, it had to be here.
Yeah.
Had to get my speed up, I was going down the hill, there's a curve right there in the hill, and I got one way. Man, I left the road.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
I said, Lord, it's my time. Take it. God, do something.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know how. Because I left the road.
Yeah.
I left it going down in the ditch. I don't know how I got back.
Yeah. I mean, there are moments, I think everybody, if we pay enough attention, there are moments where really weird stuff goes on, and you're like...
They don't talk about it, but you had help from above.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't talk about it.
Yeah. And sometimes it's other people who are places where they shouldn't be. And not in a bad way, but like, you were over there, why are you here? Like, Brother Glenn used to talk about the black angel, and he fell off, and there this guy was to catch him, and he wasn't anywhere over there when he fell, that he knew of. So, I mean, sometimes it's stuff like that, and sometimes it's just totally unexplainable, to us. So we have angels then, these spirit things. It's kind of the best that we can do at this point with it. But what about people? Because people have souls. Sometimes in the Bible, people have spirits. And every time in the Bible, people have flesh. Now, in the Old Testament, those are three very different words. Nefesh is soul, ruach is spirits, besar, flesh. Very different terms meaning different things. So much so that in the Old Testament, a lot of the times, this word nefesh means corpses. So, okay, one thing I want to draw your attention to on that. People are created body and soul together. And it is the Jewish understanding and it is the Hebrew understanding, as you can see even in that the soul and the body are so closely linked that the word meaning soul can refer to a dead corpse. Because they're just that close together. You will hear people say this. This is one of my... I'm going to beat this drum for a little while. The worst hymn that we sing is I'll Fly Away. The worst hymn that we sing, by far, is I'll Fly Away. And the reason why it's not bad on its own, it's because of what we bring to it when we sing it. The idea that what we want out of life is to get out of this bad old fleshly body, for our soul to go to heaven and to live with Jesus and never to have to think about all this again. Because the world is evil, the flesh is evil. I mean, how many sermons do you hear where people say it's just the flesh? You got to get over the flesh. It's the, there's a recognition in the Bible that, or an equation, maybe a better way to put it, in the Bible between what we do from our spirit, which is, sort of the good stuff that we do, versus what we do in the flesh. Do you live according to the flesh or do you live according to the Spirit? Okay, Paul in Galatians, fruit of the Spirit versus fruit of the flesh. So we see that distinction being made, but that distinction is not to say that your body is unimportant or that your body doesn't matter. You take it with you. You don't take it with you with all of its problems, but you take it with you. When Paul is asked at the end of either 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians, I get them mixed up, but he is asked, what is the nature of resurrection? How is that going to happen? And Paul says, what a dumb question. Jesus was raised from the dead. Okay, thank you, Paul. What does that mean? The tomb did not have a body in it. And when the disciples see Jesus, they see him in a body that can eat, a body that they can touch, a body that still has nail scars, but also one that can go through walls.
That's the proof of pure 100% proof in holes in his hands and his feet.
Right. Thomas touches his side. That's where Thomas wants to do. So it's still a body. It still functions like a body, but he can go through walls. He can disappear. He can reappear. Evidently, he can do a little bit of changing, because whenever the women first see him in the garden, they think he's the gardener. They don't think he's Jesus. And it's not until he calls their name that they recognize who he is. So you get a body, and it's the body that you died with. But it's glorified. It's changed. It's perfected. It's a part of you. I go back to all the time, what does God say in Genesis? He created the land and the sea and the birds and the beasts and all the rest of it and people, and then the three best words in the Old Testament, it is good. And when he creates people, it was very good. Now, if it wasn't good, why would God call it good? And if it is good, why would he not also restore it? Because your body is part of creation. And Paul says that the ministry of Jesus is to restore all of creation back to himself. Well, you're created. Okay? So, just want to throw that out there as, be careful of people who tell you that your body's not good for anything. Oh, it very much is. It was designed and created by God just like everybody else's. So just to give you an example of how the Old Testament is doing that, Leviticus 21:11 is giving instructions for the priest. And the writer there says that the priest shall not go into any dead body and defile himself. Now we know the Jews were kind of weird about dead stuff. But that word for body, he shall not go into any dead body, that word is not Besar, which is what you'd expect it to be, but is Nephesh, the word for soul. Now, we have adopted that in English. The South really likes it. It's not bless your heart, but bless his soul.
The soul and the spirit are divided asunder. I thought the spirit and soul were the same. That's a little different.
Yeah, that's in Hebrews. Word of God is alive and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, dividing, something about dividing asunder to the bone and marrow and soul and spirit and thoughts and intentions of the heart. That's a really bad quote. Yeah, but when we say oh, bless their soul, or somebody is a merry old soul, you'll hear that sometime. Yeah, old King Cole was a merry old soul. We're not saying that old King Cole didn't have a body. We're talking about him, what makes him him. Right. So we're not saying the immaterial part versus the body. It's all of it together. Now, in the New Testament, so I'll write this in red. In the New Testament, we have two words that Paul likes to use, which is soma for flesh, and that's actually pronounced suke. That's a Y, but in Greek it's suke. It is, by the way, the root of this is where we get psychology and psychiatry and anything that has to do with your brain, how you think. That distinction in the way that the New Testament and the Old Testament thinks of it is not clear anymore. Because like two things happen. Either when you die, you cease to exist until Jesus comes back, and then you get to exist again, or you have to be immediately zapped up to heaven. Now, I saw Courtney, so who knows? Who knows what happens when we die? I'll just be honest with you. A lot of people are more confident about this than me. Paul says to be absent in the body is to be present in the face of Christ. Which again, there's a distinction. To be absent in the body is to be present. So it seems to me that what happens is the soul goes on and is in the presence of Jesus. But that's not the end of the story, because Jesus has to come back. Jesus has to restore all things, and I think that's where you get when Paul says in 1 Thessalonians, the Lord shall descend with a shout, and the dead in Christ shall rise first to meet him in the air, and in a twinkling we shall be changed. Okay, those bodies are still here. They may be decomposed, but they're still here. We're going to rise into the air. My reading on that is we get our body back. Our perfected, glorified body, we get our body back. In the meantime, I think you exist in a state of whatever it means. I think it will be. I think it will be. Paul said...
Everything be restored. We got injured, everything, we get a new body. We get it all new.
Right. It's fixed. It's perfect. It's glorified. And there again, Paul, I rely on Paul a lot for this because he's about the only one who says anything about it. But Paul says you will know as you were known. Which to me means if I knew Courtney was my cousin here, I'm going to know in heaven that she's my cousin. Now, does that mean that the relationship is going to be the same? I don't think we'll care. Because I think the express purpose of heaven is to worship God. But family is so important for God. Family is so important for the Bible, and I just don't see the Bible holding up to, well, never mind. Forget, you don't need family anymore. Now, okay, some people will argue with me and say, heaven is the family of God. So everybody is family. That is the family that God's worried about. Maybe so. Again, as I say, I'm not as confident as some people are about it. But my reading on it is, yes, same body, recognizable body, we'll know each other. But I think my read on that question is when we die, the soul goes on and exists in whatever it means to be in the face of the Lord.
Because the Bible says that he says, I go to prepare a place for
Right.
you, and when I'm finished, I will return.
I will return.
People that have
Right.
died before obviously it's finished,
Right.
are they there already? Or are they kind of in like the really
Yeah.
long?
Yeah.
Have a prayer place for you. I guess it'd be like home, everybody's not going to be together. I don't know, that's hard to fathom in your mind.
So, okay. Maybe, Josh, you might have to wait another week. But
He won't be here next week. He leaves for Dallas in the morning. So.
oh, no. When do you come back?
2 weeks.
2 weeks? Okay. Well, I can push it off. Yeah, and wait for you to get back. We have enough material. Okay. That business of I go to prepare a place for you. Okay, back that up and put it in the context of in my Father's house, or in my Father's mansion, there are many rooms. In my Father's house, there are many houses, depending on your translation. I don't know that Jesus means that literally. What I think he means is there is a divine plan for every person. And there is a divine place for every person. But heaven is heaven.
Do you think heaven's already, it's there, like he's not saying, I'm like, it's preparing it for that single person that he, okay,
No. I think the place that he goes to prepare is the new heaven and the new earth. So I don't think the new heaven and the new earth is ready until Jesus comes back.
And then heaven is going to come to the earth. I can't even imagine it's going to be here.
Yeah, I mean, it's very odd. But I think that's the place that he goes to prepare. At the same time, and now this is, sorry, I'm getting philosophy land for a minute. God exists outside of time. So I don't know what that means for us, if God exists outside of time. Because it may well be, I don't want to say this too confidently because I can't prove it, but it may well be that yes, we go. Because in a sense, it's already there. But it's not here in time. It exists with God. See, I told you, it's like philosophy land.
And then what gets me is people say, then why should they all be?
No, they're not. They don't care.
I feel like they always say, you won't be sad in heaven. And to me, I feel like watching everybody move on with their lives would make you sad.
Well, I will just tell you.
Something that is,
My
I don't think they care with that. That's just me.
My granddaddy would roll over in his grave sometimes if he watched me. I mean, I'm just saying, and I don't think you can have no more sorrow. if they just had to look down and watch it, don't do that. Oh, he did it. So that, that's my. Oh, I gotta shut up, don't I? So okay. You know what? We'll go to Luke whenever. I like it much better when I can do this anyway, because I know people are interested. So I guess I will stop with the flesh is important, the soul is important. They go together, but they're not necessarily in the same place at the same time when you die. But I do think the body gets reconstituted, reunited with the soul at the new heaven and the new earth. All right.
Take a theologian to figure it all out.
I got a degree in Bible, but it didn't prepare me for this. No. Yeah. Hey. All right. Well, let's pray real quick. Gracious God, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time that you've given us to come to your word. I thank you for the interest and the questions and the conversation. Lord, all things that we wonder about, but now good reason for us to study them together. And I just pray that you would be with us as we do this. Lord, I want to pray for Josh as he travels tomorrow and he goes off to Dallas, that you'd be with him and you'd keep him safe and you'd bring him back to us, Lord. I just pray now that you'd be with the second hour as Brother Kevin preaches, Lord, that he would bring the message that you've given him, Lord, that you move him out of the way and that you'd speak to us and through your Spirit, Lord, and that all of us would have eyes to see and ears to hear and hearts willing to understand what you have for us there. Lord, I pray for Miss Dana and Miss Dot and myself as we bring the music that we'd usher in a spirit of worship this morning as we prepare to hear that word from you. And Lord, I pray for our fellowship this afternoon and tonight, Lord, that you would be about that we would come together and that we'd be strengthened in our bonds with one another and in our bond with you as a result of it. I pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, y'all know